Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do want to thank Chairman Doyle and Ranking Member Latta for convening this hearing today, and also want to thank all these great witnesses here. This is obviously a huge problem for our constituents. Like one of our other members, Mr. Walden, he mentioned he had 20 town halls. I've had 20 coffees with your congressman. I can't say that in every single one this has come up, but in most of them it has. Especially in a place like Iowa where we have an aging population. I'm aging myself, and so I get a disproportionate number of these damn calls as well. And you know, I sit here and I think, well, I've got a cell number that I didn't think anybody had. I'm a member of Congress. How'd this happen? Well, they can get through to all of us. That's the thing. It's just quite amazing. And we've got to have this relief. There's no doubt about it, because I do hear about this all the time, and it's a bipartisan problem because every one of our constituents, you know, could potentially be faced with this problem going forward. I'm glad that we got a lot of these bills that we're talking about today, and it does seem like there are some technological limitations to the scope of these bills, so I do want to raise the question of what to do for the folks who don't have the latest and greatest technology, whether that means cell phones and smartphones with screens or home phones with some sort of digital output. It strikes me that the Americans who are likely to lack these new technologies are likely to be older and potentially more vulnerable to the very sorts of criminals who call with a bogus story about owing taxes to the IRS or claim of a loved one in jeopardy or whatever the case may be. So to that point, I have a couple questions for everybody. I'm not going to pick out anyone in particular. I'll just let you folks go at it. I do want to discuss the challenges and limitations for implementing Shaken/Stir to the widest possible consumer base. I understand that gateways might be helpful on older networks. How could the use of gateways help make sure that rural customers in particular get access to these new ways to stop robocalls? And I'll just open that up to the panel. Let you folks jump in.
It's one of the limitations on the Stir-Shaken framework is that as it's currently designed, the Stir-Shaken standard works for IP traffic. It doesn't work for the TDM traffic that's the older copper networks. And so that could have an impact on folks who are more dependent on the traditional telephone, copper line telephone service. With that being said, that's the current limitation on the standard. And it's also important, two of the things I mentioned in my testimony, no solicitation services or anonymous call rejection services, those will work over anything, whether it's a TDM network or an IP network. And so services like that, if somebody has purposely masked their caller ID, the call doesn't get through. Or if somebody doesn't go through the process of, there's a human element before somebody actually it rings, there's a step has to be taken that this is in fact a real call. So there are things that can still be done to address that kind of traffic, even though the current Stir-Shaken standard wouldn't be effective.
Yeah. Anyone else? Yes, go ahead, Mr. Stallman.
Yes, implementing Stir-Shaken in our organization would require us to basically redo our front end of our telecommunication system because we're not up to speed with that new technology. We have looked into it, but the point is, we're just one organization across the nation to get this implemented, and for every dollar I spend in trying to protect our organization or redoing infrastructure is a dollar away from care and research.
Anybody else?
Yeah, and go ahead. For our solution, right, we piggyback right now off of simultaneous ring. It's available in theory on TDM, on IP, on mobile, on landline, right? We like the idea of being completely backwards compatible. In theory, instead of like a gateway, we could somehow do the Stir-Shaken lookup on behalf of the technologies and the carriers that can't support that. How that would play out, not exactly sure, but it's absolutely, I think, important to everybody just looks at the latest and greatest. You have the brand new, fancy cell phones, but there are still tons of landlines, and those are sometimes even more vital than even the mobile lines.
That's right. Ms. Saunders, do you have anything you want to say?
The only thing I'd like to point out, if I might, is that Stir-Shaken is a critically needed technology, but it will not take care of all the problems of identifying who the callers are. As was explained in an article in the New York Times just last week, their callers also have the ability to buy hundreds of phone numbers that are essentially anonymous. And when one number is caught by this technology, they just switch to another phone number.
And I see my time's up. I apologize. I have to interrupt. But I don't want us ever to forget about rural folks and older folks. Thank you very much, and I yield back. Thank you.